In a previous video, we talked about the purpose of a dashboard to help us tell a story, and that we can use dashboards from everything from customer retention to comparing performance, for looking at how well we're meeting our goals, financial performance, complaint tracking, web analytics, sentiment tracking, and more. So when we go to create a dashboard itself, remember we want to create a dashboard that helps us tell a story. And so we go back to our video discussion of the components of a story and using data to tell stories. So think about a dashboard like a newspaper, an infographic, a website. It is a combination of visualizations, so different graphs, but it can also be numbers. It can also be very limited amount of text or headers that help contribute to your story. When you design a dashboard, what it should contain is the big picture, and then it should contain details that help with that big picture. So what is the big picture you're trying to convey? And then you might have, from that big picture at the top, then you might have details. And so you could have visualizations or statistics that go with the details, and they should tie together and help answer common questions that arise from that big picture. Your dashboard should have a cohesive identity, a color scheme that ties it all together, and it should have labeling that helps us with the big picture and the details and to help us flow between. We should also choose visuals that are either static or interactive, or we can hit a button or slide a scale to change them, that help convey the clearest message possible. And then we need to decide for that dashboard, how often does the data need to be updated? Is it one that is continually updated? We talked about how McDonald's has a dashboard to let them track the amount of average time in the drive-through, and you can see the other franchise locations and how they're doing. It's updating every couple minutes. We could have one that updates weekly, annually, or we can update it ourselves individually. And so we need to decide how frequent does that information need to be updated. Is it tied to a database so that it is updated as soon as the database is updated? So if we're looking at a dashboard, like here's the web analytics one, the top of the dashboard is the big picture in terms of returning viewers, unique viewers. And then it dives into the details. Who are these viewers? When are they watching? What are they watching? And so we're answering those questions that naturally arrive when you're thinking about, okay, who's visiting your YouTube channel? So again, big picture, then we need to flow to the details. We need color scheme. You can see here's a consistent color scheme with the purples and blues that help us flow from one to the next. And we have labeling to clearly see the different information, so we have a very clear message. So whenever designing a dashboard, we want to make sure that we are considering all these components. Okay, so let's go and build a dashboard. So if you want to create a dashboard, one of the packages you can use in Python is called Dash. And so we will need to install Dash if it is not already installed. Now this workbook that you see here, this is the dashboard workbook that you can find at drstephpowers.github.io/BIA. We're working right here in the book called Dashboards. And we are actually going to build some dashboard type pieces from the customer relationship management database. So you'll also need that file as well. So you go in and make sure you have at the very top of this. We have mounted our Google Drive and ported in our files so that we can use those to create visuals for our dashboard. So make sure you've done that if you haven't already, because we will need those. The previous sections of these were some of the visuals. So when it comes to Dash as a dashboard app, it requires the use of Plotly-based graphs. So as we go back through the data visualization tools we've talked about in multiple different videos, it is the Plotly ones that are the ones that can go into Dash. If you have lots of other visuals, there are other forms of dashboards that you can use or Plotly has kind of equivalent of many things. So when you think of radar plots, those are Plotly. When you think of these gauge plots we just created, those are Plotly. And so just keep that in mind. If you're using Dash to create dashboards, then there is a restriction there that it's got to be their particular visualization tools. So we install Dash, and we are going to pull in that data frame 3, which is the data related to our customer relationship management information system. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to rename some of these columns we're going to use, just because these are the simplified Q1, Q2, but what we want to show up on our dashboard is not Q1, Q2, we want it to show as salesperson. So we're going to rename the columns Q1 as salesperson, Q7 as percent listen, Q8 is talking speed, Q9 is average pause, Q10 is monologue. So we could create a dashboard for our salespeople to see how they're doing for some performance management. So we're going to put our salespeople and some of these metrics up on the dashboard. To create a dashboard, you are going to need from Dash, import capital Dash, HTML, DCC, callback, output, input, dash table. Oh, I did DCC twice. There's also some other ones. So for example, if you want to add some text, then there is an additional component you will need to add here. What this one allows us to do is add a table, and then the DCC allows us to put in the graphs and charts. Okay, so we're going to import plotly.express as PX and import pandas as PD. Now, when it comes to creating your dashboard, we are creating an app, which is equal to dash, and then you have underscore, underscore, name, underscore, underscore. Okay, so that gets us started. And then the next thing we need to define is the layout of the app. So we're going to use html.div. And so here what we're doing is this is HTML code to say, okay, let's start this division. And this division is going to have a name called customer relationship. Okay, and I'm just going to show you, let's go down. Oh, I may not have it running. So let's run it, and then I'll come back and show you these pieces here. Okay. So hopefully it loads. Now, if you go to run it and you get a 404 error, then you need to just change the port, and you can change it to 8030, 8888. If you specify no port and it works fine, great. And if later you find that it doesn't work, you can change the port. So what we have here in our very rudimentary dashboard is there is a table here, and we can change the graph. Let me just zoom out here. It's very hard to do this here. View, zoom out. Okay, let's do this so we can see it better. I don't know why it suddenly changed my background to gray. Okay, so what we have here, oh, it's because I'm in nighttime mode. You can see it better if it's in daytime mode. It's all white on the background rather than this gray on top. But it's because I happen to have this in nighttime mode. Okay, so the way this code works is that this title here, customer relationship, appears at the top left. And then this one is going to have radio items, so we can click on these buttons. There are also sliders, so you have choices here. And in this particular case, the radio items, this radio buttons here, are going to be percent listen, talking speed, average pause, and monologue. So these are the 4 you can choose from. And it's going to default to having the button on percent listen. That's what this step is right here. And this is a controls and radio item just for the type that it is. So you would change this here to be what you want it to be. Now, in this case, these options here are tied to the names of variables in our data table, right? Percent listen, talking speed, average pause, monologue. And that's because what we're going to do is we are going to have it create a graph. So that's this DCC.graph. and it is going to create a figure based on the radio buttons, based on this controls. So controls and radio item is tied to controls and graph. The other thing that this particular dashboard is going to have is a table. So that's this dash_table, data table. And so what you can see here, and this is not a very good dashboard, so we want to lay it out nicer. I'm just showing you the basics here. Is here we have a table, and then here we have our graph. We can go through the different salespeople here and see their listening, talking, and average and monologue, so we can track who's doing what. And these radio buttons here, when you change this talking speed, it changes the graph here below it to the next one. So average pause, monologue. So we could then start to see some of the performance metrics in terms of who is allowing the customer to talk and who is not, who is talking too fast or too slow. So we can amend these graphs to show differences. So what we're doing here with this DCC.graph is that you can see here it says update graph, and it's updating graph based on the column that's chosen, and those columns that are chosen are going to be here from those radio options and from this table here. And so we're going to then create a histogram using our Plotly Express. So again, dashboard has to use Plotly. And it's going to show on this graph the histogram, or sorry, the salesperson is going to be on the horizontal, and the column chosen, and that column chosen comes back to these columns specified here in the radio buttons. That's going to show that here. So you can see this graph, here's the salespeople's names, and as we change the radio buttons, it will change the different performance metrics. So what we have here is that with our dashboard, we define the layout, the headers, the different components here, radio buttons, tables, then graph. So notice it's in that order: heading, radio buttons, table, then graph. And then you have a section that is callback, and that is going to be the part that is manipulatable, the part we can change. And so that's going to be here, this radio button, and the graph that goes with it. So the input is the radio button selection. The output is it's going to change that graph. So these two pieces here are tied to this radio items here and the fact that our DCC graph says controls and graph. This here, this update graph, this is the part that updates or changes as we select a different button. And then the very last part of your dashboard here is if __name __equals. This main part here, that is, and then app.run, that's going to then get your dashboard to compile. So again, if you have an error 404 error, then change the port number to get it to run properly. So we can add lots of different things to our dashboards. There are also ways to use templates so that you can have side-by-side graphs and include more information. We can include more text in our visualizations. So I encourage you to look at Dash and what other people have built in terms of dashboards to see lots of options. But the basics here is that we have our header. You can have those radio buttons or sliders, and then you add components. So for example, let's suppose that I want another graph, but this one not interactive. So that was an interactive graph. What if I want a more static graph added to this dashboard? And maybe what I want is a stacked graph that looks like this. So I'm going to update the dashboard periodically to look at each of my salespeople to see where they are in terms of the number of clients they have that they've contacted versus proposed, submitted proposals to versus negotiated contracts with or provided demonstrations to. So we could look at in terms of which of our salespeople has the most customers and where are they in the process of converting them from leads to committed customers. So to do that, what we need to do is first create this graph. So we're going to, from Pandas, import crosstab, and we're going to import, I'm just going to make this bigger because right now it's super tiny. and I can't see it, and you probably can't see it. From pandas import crosstab, import plotly.graph_objects as go. Excuse me. Then what we can do is create that crosstab, and we can call it whatever you want. That crosstab is going to be based on salesperson. And then when we're looking at where the customer is in the process, this one happens to be the first month of data. So I think that's March. So question 6 and salesperson. And what we get in our crosstab is this table here. So Chen has 6 customers who've been contacted, 2 that have seen a demo, 3 that are in negotiations, 2 that have gotten a proposal, 2 that are potential customers that are qualified to be customers but have not yet been contacted. So we have here the different classifications of that relationship. We want to turn it first into this graph so that we can put it in our dashboard, which means it needs to be a Plotly graph. So we're going to use go.bar. Again, many of the data visualization tools that we have looked at are Plotly, or if not, there is a Plotly equivalent. So if you're looking for a particular data visualization tool, and the one we showed you in previous videos was not a Plotly one, then Google it, because there probably is a Plotly equivalent. The Plotly ones are the more interactive ones because they're made for these dashboards, right? Like the ones that zoom in and out and show more information when you click in. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create an empty list called data. And what we're going to need to do is to take this information and we need to pile it so that it takes all of the relationships for Chen and it stacks it on top of each other. So to do that, it's a little tricky here. So we're going to create a loop for X in SSC. That's our crosstab. We're going to go by the columns. So we're going to go for each column, because one of the challenges with stacked graphs is the way to load them into the graph itself is kind of the opposite of what you would think. So rather than kind of take an entire row and then make that one person and flip that into a column, the way that most of these load is they say, okay, well, let's take this particular category contacted, load, everybody in, and then demo. Add this one to this one and this one to this one and go that way one at a time. And so that's what we're doing here is we're looping through the columns in this crosstab and appending the data here. We are going to take the names, which are a string. So this X matches here. It's recognizing that the names here are a string and they are in index position. And from there, we're going to pull these different numbers for each of these different columns. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to add all that here. And then we're going to use go.figure and put our data in. And then we're going to update the layout to be stacked. When we do this, we get this chart here. All right, so now we have our stacked, so we can now compare all of our different salespeople. Let's then put that into our dashboard. So this dashboard here, we have the pieces we had before, so we haven't changed that. We are importing dash and dash table and DCC to allow for the graphs and the table if we're putting those in. We are creating an app that is a dash. We are changing the layout here, and we can have different headers. So we're going to change this to be salesperson performance on the top left. That's the main header, H1. And then we're going to have a row that is going to have our radial buttons and our table. And we could remove some of these things. So for example, if you didn't want the table, okay, we can get rid of the table there. And we have our radial buttons and our graph. Okay, and so then what we're going to do is we are going to add in the static graph as a next section. So this is the next division here. And we haven't given these labels. If we want to give them labels, you could put something where it says children, you could put a title. And we're just going to insert here a graph. So dcc.graph, ID relationship. And here we're just doing figure equals figure, which means that this figure has to be called figure. If you called it something else, so if you called this cat, cat equals go.figure, cat.update, then that's what we would call here for this piece. So you've created this Plotly graph outside of your dashboard, and then you're pulling it in. It does not have any radial button sliders or anything attached to it. So it is just a static one. That means the callback here is still related to an input of a radial button, an output of a graph, and that graph being the histogram here of the salesperson. And the output for that histogram is the column chosen, which is going to be whichever radial button they pick. So these radial buttons, right, need to tie to a column in that data set. All right, let's run this. Again, if it has trouble running, then you can always change the port here. Now, notice we got rid of the table because, tables are not super visually appealing, so we might just not want to have any tables at all. And again, I apologize, I'm in night mode on my computer, so it's putting the background as gray. This would otherwise be white behind this here. So it's not that the actual formatting of the dash is the problem. I'm just in night mode, so this is gray behind here. So again, radial buttons to change the graph. We can see how that changes here. And in addition to that, we can see our static graph has been added as well. So I'm just going to zoom out. So when it comes to your dashboard, you can have multiple rows of information. And of course, we put this up on a bigger screen so you can see all these components. We can put separate graphs on the left and the right. We could add in, for example, those gauge, the ones we looked at in the previous video. We just roll back in time here. We could add pieces like this, where we have some information on the right that's text, and then this gauge for performance on the left. So there's a lot of flexibility with this dashboard and dash. You can change how many different columns and rows you have there by further formatting this. So rather than spend 100 hours going through how to make some of these dashboards, we've shown you kind of the basics here, and then that means you now know what to look for. If you go look at somebody else's dash code, you'll know to look at what graph is being updated, what is changing based on sliders, radial buttons, whatever they have. You can see those here. And then you can have static graphs and you can have interactive graphs as well as labels. So I encourage you to go and look at others in terms of their dashboards and their dash code to see the options. There's also lots of templates you can import in to help with formatting.